The state autopsy is done. The results exist, someone knows what they say, and you are not allowed to see them. That is the situation in the Nolan Wells case as of the end of July 2026. The state medical examiner's office has completed its official autopsy of Nolan Wells. District Attorney Angel Myers McIlrath confirmed this. The examination is finished. The findings are written. The report exists, but it is not being released to the public. It is not being released to the press. It is not being released to the family. It is being sent directly to a Jackson County grand jury, and it will stay behind closed doors until that grand jury has reviewed it. Let me explain what that means in practical terms. A grand jury is a panel of citizens who hear evidence presented by prosecutors and decide whether there is enough to bring criminal charges. Grand jury proceedings are secret. They are not open to the public. The evidence presented to them, including autopsy reports, is not disclosed while the grand jury is in session. And grand juries can take a long time. They meet on a schedule determined by the court. They hear evidence over multiple sessions. They can take weeks. They can take months. Legal analysts who have spoken about this case have said that the grand jury process in Jackson County could stretch well into the fall, months. The family of Nolan Wells may wait months before they learn what the state's own autopsy says about how their son died. Months during which the results exist in a file, locked behind a process that the family cannot access, the public cannot see, and the internet cannot verify. District Attorney McIlrath has defended this approach. She stated that every death in Jackson County, except those from natural causes and non-criminal car accidents, is presented to the grand jury. She said this is standard. She said this is how she has handled death investigations throughout her entire career. And from a procedural standpoint, she is correct. Many jurisdictions do route non-natural deaths through a grand jury. It is a recognized legal mechanism. But standard procedure in a case this volatile, in a case that has generated this level of national attention, in a case where the family has already expressed a deep lack of trust in the official process, standard procedure does not feel standard. It feels like a wall. It feels like a door being closed in the face of a family that is already standing on the outside, looking in. And here is the context that makes the sealing of the autopsy results even more significant. The family did not wait for the state's autopsy. They commissioned their own. They hired Dr. Roger Mitchell, an independent medical examiner, to conduct a second autopsy on Nolan's body. They did this because they did not trust the state's process. They did this because the initial ruling was drowning, and they did not accept that ruling. They did this because they wanted their own expert to look at their son's body and tell them what happened. And what did their expert tell them? He could not determine the cause of death. He could not determine the manner of death, not because he is not qualified, not because he did not try. He could not determine it because the throat and larynx, the structures that are most critical for determining drowning versus strangulation versus other causes, were not in the body when he received it. The independent autopsy is incomplete because critical evidence is missing. So now look at the full picture. The state has completed its autopsy. The results are sealed behind a grand jury. The family's independent autopsy is incomplete because the most important evidence was absent from the body. 2 autopsies, 2 processes, and the family still does not have an answer to the only question that matters. How did their son die? The state's findings may contain that answer. If the state retained the throat structures, if the state's autopsy was conducted with the full body available, then the state may have been able to determine a cause of death that the independent examiner could not. And that determination, whatever it is sitting in a report that is being sent to a grand jury. The family's own expert could not give them an answer. And the one entity that might have an answer is not sharing it. Now, the DA would argue that this is not a choice. She would argue that this is the law. She would argue that releasing autopsy results before a grand jury reviews them could compromise the investigation, could tip off potential suspects, could prejudice the proceedings. And those are legitimate legal concerns. Prosecutors do not typically release evidence in active investigations, especially not evidence that is being presented to a grand jury. But the counterargument is this. In a case where the family has already lost trust in the process, where the public is filling every information gap with speculation and conspiracy, where people are being arrested for making threats, where a judge's children are being targeted, where a mother is being harassed at her workplace, it's in that environment, withholding the one piece of information that could either confirm or deny the family's suspicions does not build trust. It destroys what little is left. The information vacuum in this case is not theoretical. It is real, and it is causing real damage. In the absence of official findings from either autopsy, the internet has become the de facto courtroom. Every gap in information is being filled with speculation. Every silence from the authorities is being interpreted as a cover-up. Every delay is being read as evidence of something being hidden. And in that environment, AI-generated content, unverified claims, and outright falsehoods are spreading alongside the real facts, making it impossible for most people to tell the difference. The family is caught in the middle of this. They commissioned an independent autopsy because they wanted answers. The independent autopsy could not give them answers because evidence was missing. The state's autopsy may have answers, but those answers are locked behind a grand jury. And while they wait, the internet is conducting its own investigation, reaching its own verdicts, and punishing anyone it decides is guilty, including the family itself. Christine Wansley, Nolan's mother, has been targeted with fake negative reviews at her workplace. She is a nurse. Strangers who never met her son are trying to get her fired. They are sending her threatening messages. They are mailing her harassing letters. Ben Crump called the attackers sick, evil people. And while this is happening to the family, the official results that could either confirm or refute the theories driving this harassment are sitting in a sealed file. Think about that dynamic for a moment. The family is being attacked because of theories about what happened to their son. The information that could prove or disprove those theories exists, and it is locked away. The very process that is supposed to deliver justice is in the short term contributing to the conditions that are harming the family. Not because the DA is malicious, not because the grand jury system is broken, but because the timeline of institutional process and the timeline of public hysteria are badly misaligned. The system moves in months, the internet moves in minutes, and the family is being crushed in the gap between the two. Elmore Wansley, Nolan's father, said something that captures this perfectly. He said, "We cannot grieve the way we need to because we are being disrespected. We are being called all kinds of racist bad parents. We just want the truth. We just want the truth." That is what this family is asking for. Not a conviction, not a specific outcome, not revenge, the truth. And right now, the truth may exist in a state autopsy report, and that report is behind a grand jury door that will not open for months. The question of whether the state has the throat structures is critical here, and it connects directly to the grand jury process. If the state's autopsy was conducted with the throat and larynx available, either because they were retained from the first examination or because they were collected during the state's own process, then the state may have a cause of death determination that the independent examiner does not. That determination would be part of the report going to the grand jury. And the grand jury would be the first body outside the state's own office to see it. If the state does not have the throat structures, then the state's autopsy is as incomplete as the independent one. And in that case, the report going to the grand jury may also say undetermined, which would mean that neither autopsy can answer the question, and the grand jury is being asked to consider a case where the cause of death is medically unknown. Either way, the family is in the dark. Either way, the public is in the dark. And either way, the internet is filling the dark with noise. The DA says this is standard. The family says they want the truth. The internet says it already knows the truth. And the truth, whatever it is locked in a file that is moving through a process that no one outside the system can see. The autopsy results exist. The throat structures may exist. The answers the family has been begging for since July the 4th of May already be written down on paper. And all of it, every word, every finding, every conclusion is behind a door that the family cannot open, the public cannot see through, and the internet cannot reach. For now, the only thing anyone can do is wait. And while they wait, the case rots in the open air, consumed by speculation, threats, and chaos, while the one document that could calm all of it sits in silence, waiting for a grand jury that has not yet convened. There is another layer to the grand jury process that most people do not understand, and it matters here. A grand jury is not a trial jury. It does not decide guilt or innocence. It decides whether there is enough evidence to bring charges against someone. That is a lower standard than proof beyond a reasonable doubt. It is the standard of probable cause, and it means that a grand jury can conclude, based on the evidence presented, that a crime probably occurred and that a specific person probably committed it. Or it can conclude that there is not enough evidence to charge anyone. Or it can conclude that the death was not a crime at all. Each of those outcomes has enormous implications for the Nolan Wells family. If the grand jury indicts someone, then the case proceeds to trial. That could take months or years. The autopsy findings would eventually become public through the trial process, but not until then. If the grand jury declines to indict, then the case may effectively be closed. If the grand jury concludes that the death was not a crime, then the family may be left with an official finding that they have already publicly rejected and no path forward through the criminal justice system. None of these outcomes give the family what they have been asking for. What they have been asking for is the truth. What the grand jury process delivers is not truth, but a legal determination. Those two things are not the same. A grand jury can decide that there is not enough to charge someone. That does not mean nothing criminal happened. It means the evidence available does not meet the standard for prosecution. And in a case where key evidence, like the throat structures, may be missing or degraded, the evidence available may never meet that standard. The family understands this. Ben Crump understands this. That is why the legal strategy in the Nolan Wells case has been so aggressive on the civil side. The subpoenas to 5 social media platforms, the preservation letters to friends and officials, the push for joint cell phone inspections with the FBI potentially present. These are not moves that are dependent on the grand jury. They are moves that are being made in parallel on the assumption that the criminal process may not deliver the answers the family needs and that the civil process may have to. If a civil lawsuit follows, and it may, then the discovery process in that lawsuit could pry loose information that the grand jury process keeps hidden. Depositions can be taken, documents can be subpoenaed, witnesses can be examined under oath, and unlike a grand jury, civil litigation is not secret. Filings become public. The layers of confidentiality that a grand jury imposes do not apply in the same way. So the sealing of the state autopsy behind the grand jury is not the end of the road. It is a delay. It is a wall that the family will have to work around, over, and eventually through. But it is a wall that will stand for months. And during those months, the vacuum will continue to be filled by the internet, by conspiracy theories, by threats, and by the daily grinding harassment of a family that just wants to grieve. The DA says this is standard procedure. She may be right about the procedure, but procedure that ignores the reality of a viral case, that ignores the harm being done to the family in the information vacuum, that ignores the way silence gets weaponized in the modern media environment. That procedure may be technically correct and practically catastrophic at the same time. For now, the state autopsy sits sealed. The grand jury will meet on its own schedule. The family will wait. The internet will fill the silence. And the truth about how Nolan Wells died will remain locked behind a door that only a small group of citizens, meeting in secret, will be allowed to open.